Hello there. My name is Jasom Jensai, and welcome to this stream where we're going to discuss all the 16 chapters of The Mandalorian, just looking at the show as a whole and seeing how good it is, how bad it is, things I like, that kind of thing. We're also going to discuss how powerful The Mandalorian is. Um, so, like, all his feats, looking at his strategies, his strengths, and his weapons, all that kind of stuff. Um, and then we're also going to be looking at what is the best bounty hunter gear to have. And of course, that's a subjective question. So I'd love it if you left your responses to that question in the chat or in the comments if you're watching after the show. But before we get to all that, the question of the stream is who are all the specters alive at 0 BBY? So if you get this question right, you get 10 points. However, you only get one guess. Only the first person to get it right gets the points, and you can't look it up. So that's the question of the stream. Who are all the specters alive at 0 BBY? The next question, or not the next question, there's only one question. Actually, let's do this next question. What did you think of The Mandalorian? Obviously, most of you are going to say, oh, it was a great show. But what about it did you like? How much did you like it relative to other Star Wars content? And just, yeah, describe your feelings about that, basically. Um, while you guys do that in the chat or in the comments if you're watching after the show, I'm gonna describe it starting in chapter 1, moving all the way to chapter 16. So chapter 1, I really liked. Obviously, it was a great episode. You had this awesome Mando bounty hunter. We get to see him like take on these two random thugs and then capture his quarry. That was awesome to see. I mean, it wasn't like it wasn't his greatest feat, but it was just a great introduction to the character. And also the music for that scene, was just so good. Every time I watch that scene, I'm struck as soon as he opens the door by the, that what did you call it? It's a bass recorder. I'm pretty sure. Super awesome music there, and that introduction was awesome. Then we get to see more about his bounty hunting life. He's in the guild. He's working with Grief Karga, and this particular mission where he's hunting this 50-year-old, which made me, of course, think of like gray hair, probably pretty grizzled, um, like a what do you call it? I don't know. They blank in the name, like a crime boss or something. And I thought, oh, that'd be cool. But then he meets with IG-11, and by the way, IG-11 was pretty cool to see. He shoots super fast. I love the scene of him like where he's threatening to blow himself up, but of course he doesn't. Um, and then you get to the end, and they find this like 50-year-old, and he opens up this like tiny little thing, and it's baby Yoda or Grogu as we know him now, which um, was so unique and so interesting. Like I don't know, it's just, and they kept it a secret, which is just incredible. Um, I mean, everyone already knows this, but that's such a great reveal. So first episode was really good. One thing I do have to say that I kind of missed is the introduction of Kuiil and the Blurgs. That was cool. It wasn't really anything special. I liked it, but it wasn't too bad. The one thing I kind of didn't really like is that he had this moment where he's just like, oh, suddenly I get it and can ride Blurgs, which, I don't know. I feel like, um, I don't know how realistic that is. Basically, um, is the thing I'm not comfortable with about that scene. And then the other thing is, how can you not be able to use speeders or a ship but you can ride blurgs? Like I don't know, something about that just doesn't like. Why can't you use speeders? I guess. I don't really get it. So if you have a theory or a canonical answer, would be even better. But if you've got any ideas about why you can only use blurgs on there, on that particular like those shattered planes, um, leave that in the chat or the comments. So that's chapter 1, and that was a great start. Then we get on to chapter 2, which I also enjoyed. I mean, I can see why a lot of people wouldn't enjoy this particular one, but I think the consensus is that it's good, and I agree with that. Um, it's again on that same planet, and you get to see Mando killing Jawas, which was awesome, and then he loses to Jawas, which was also pretty cool. I don't know how he survived that though. That fall after he gets shocked, that was kind of funny. And then he goes back to Queel and negotiates with the Jawas, which was hilarious. Then fights the Mudhorn, which was awesome. And then at the very end, you see Grogu lift up the Mudhorn, which was super cool to see. And then later, that becomes his signet at the very end, um, which is a great callback. So I guess it isn't really filler because Grogu uses the Force, but you could have shown that at like you could have done a summarized version of that um, at the beginning of the third one, which I would not like as much. In fact, I think they should like show more. Basically, the show should be longer because it's a TV show. If it was a movie, you probably wouldn't want to keep that in there. But it's a TV show, so I think they should definitely keep it in there. Moving on to chapter 3. That was such a cool episode. Um, you see him like basically give away the child. Then he crafts himself an entire suit of Beskar, which was so cool. Then he goes back and frees Grogu, which was also awesome to see. Just the way he took out all those stormtroopers. Some of the kills were like, "Oh, I'm gonna punch you because it looks cool," and then shoot you, which would obviously you could just shoot them first. But I don't have too much of a problem with that. It just annoys me. And I think the most annoying part about that is they do it throughout the entire show, not that they did it just that once. So I think that's something that they could correct in the future, but it doesn't bother me too much. Like if you're gonna punch and stuff, I mean, there's a reason you would do that, but just because it looks cool doesn't necessarily have to be that reason. I don't think it's a good reason to do that. So what are your thoughts on like punching while holding a blaster? I mean, it's specifically in situations where a blaster might be more useful, but wouldn't look as cool. What are your thoughts on that? Should filmmakers, how realistic are filmmakers supposed to be? Um, so then he has this moment where um, he reaches for his lever to turn on the ship or something. I don't remember what exactly it does. I think it like turns on the rocket so he starts moving, and he sees the little knob missing, which of course is a callback to what they did earlier, where the child took off that little knob to play with because it was shiny, which was super cool to see. That callback is very. It's not only good in that scene, but focusing on that gives their relations or gives them an object to represent the relationship, which they used in later episodes, specifically chapter 5, chapter 6. There was a missed opportunity for it in chapter 8, but I guess I don't know. Did they call back to that in any other? I think he takes it off at the very end of chapter 8 and gives it to him. I'm not certain about that though. It might be like chapter 3 or something. But anyways, that little knob was a super cool detail. So then wait, did I get the timeline wrong? Anyways, he goes back, he takes out all those stormtroopers, blah 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 about punching and then shooting. Um, and then he escapes, and then the bounty hunters with their fobs, which they all kept even though they didn't. Never mind. That's it's a little not so much a plot hole. It's just something that doesn't make that much sense. To me at least. Why do they all have fobs, and they're all still there, and the bounty is already gotten? Why wouldn't they have to return them? Um, I don't know. But anyways, it's interesting that all the bounty hunters are kind of going for him. Because I mean, they can't let him just steal the asset. That's bad for the guild rules. It's bad for their reputation. It's bad for them. They don't get hired as much. Right. So, Mando, he gets he gets attacked basically, and he fights them off pretty effectively for a while. I mean, there's just too many of them. He forces the R2 unit to drive, but then Grief Karga shoots it, which is pretty smart. He uses his rifle pretty well. He uses his blaster very well. He uses that flamethrower, but then it runs out of gas. Um, yeah. So that was cool to see. But then, of course, he's saved by the Mandalorians who come out of hiding. That was also cool to see. One thing I don't really understand that much is why does revealing their numbers make it so that everyone can kill them? Like, revealing your numbers is a disadvantage, yes, because then if there's only one, people don't know how much of a threat you are. But it's not so much of a disadvantage to where you would just be dead. I suppose it's that it's not so much that they revealed themselves, it's that Mando took the child and the Empire wanted it back, so they punished the Mandalorians for taking Grogu. Um, so, anyways, Grogu and Mando take off and they go to Chapter 4, which was probably my least favorite episode. There are a lot of cool things. Like that ATST was super cool, with those like red eyes and it was super dark. The what do you call it? The like raiders. That idea was cool. That they get hired to take on raiders, and it was a cool episode. But and Cara Dune was also pretty cool to see. I liked that. I think Mando should have put up a slightly better fight against her when she first attacks him, but it's pretty consistent with his character. Because I mean, she got the jump on him. She would not have won because he has Beskar, which he does rely on significantly. Um, and once she got in close, she had all the advantages of her fighting style, while he did not have the advantages of his weapons, and his fighting style. So it makes sense. It's pretty consistent with his ability level, in my opinion, but I feel like it's not quite consistent. I don't know. So, anyways, some of the things I didn't like in that episode are, actually, one of the other things I did like is the whole thing with his mask is further expanded on. He hasn't taken off since he was about their age, which is in reference to little children. So, there was that one like widow of the village, which was kind of interesting. I don't know. Then there was the whole like the villagers getting trained, which was a cool idea, but in execution it wasn't that good. Like they trained them in spear combat, which they didn't really use, and they didn't really train them that well or train them that long in spear combat. Their blaster training was better. But anyways, I suppose maybe it's not better, and I'm just ignorant. Because I mean I don't really know that much about shooting. I know more about like spear fighting than shooting. So maybe I'm just ignorant about it, but I would assume it's better. It looked better to me. But really, the whole idea, and the whole how they took out the ATST, where Kara like swam up and started shooting at it, I guess, and it somehow stepped in after it had found out that there was a giant hole there. I don't know. That just didn't really work for me. And then there was the bounty hunter who was about to kill Grogu, and then you hear the blaster shot, and it's Cara Dune, which was a pretty effective fake out, but it doesn't really make much sense that Cara was able to see that guy before he shot, when he could have shot before. I don't know. It's if he can get that close without being detected, which I guess maybe he was, but without like Mando being detected, you would think that he would be able to kill Grogu, and so would so many others. I don't know. There is ways to explain that, but it just you have to explain it is the problem. Moving on to chapter 5, this was another one that a lot of people don't like. I kind of like this one. A lot of people don't like that they went back to Tatooine, which I don't mind, especially now that based on a lot of comments in chapter 9, which kind of put this one in perspective. But there was a lot of cool things in this episode, like the speeder bikes. Speeder bikes are always awesome. Pretty much every time. I can't think of a bad speeder bike scene. Yeah, I can't think of a single bad speeder bike scene. All of them are super awesome. But you got speeder bikes, and by the way, the speeder bikes music is awesome. Super fun to listen to. It's a cool instrument. I don't know what it is though. Then what else is there? There's Fennec Shand, which was cool. It was it's interesting that she or Mando said that her sniper could penetrate his Beskar from close up, or he said, "Oh, I survived only because it's Beskar and we're at far distances," implying that it would get broken at closer ranges, which means that that rifle is stronger than a lightsaber, which I don't like very much, but I don't know. I guess maybe no, that doesn't make sense. I don't know. That's one thing I don't like about it. Um, Another thing I don't like about it is nothing super interesting happened. I guess Fennec Shand got like found by Boba Fett, which comes into play later. But I mean that's not super important. You could just have Boba Fett be by himself, and there's ways to work around that. Um, then there's what else happens in that episode? Yeah, that's kind of the problem. Is it's filler, which isn't necessarily bad. Um, Especially in this show, they use filler really well, but it doesn't advance the main plot very much. Then there's Chapter 6, which is also filler, but it does it a lot better. Um, at least in my opinion. Some people don't like this one. So Chapter 6 is obviously the one where he teams up with like all those bounty hunters, Mayfeld, Shien, what's the last one? Zero, and Berg. Berg is the last one. And they go into this prison ship, free Quinn, and they betray Mando, and Mando comes out and just hunts them down. This one didn't have much plot, had a lot of character backstory, but not too much character development. There's some. You just get to know them better. Um, but then I lost my train of thought. But the action in this, the scenes and the dialogue also is very well done. Yeah, just super good action. Kind of portrays Mando as what he is, a crafty and powerful warrior who can take on like so many opponents and just dispatch them with, I don't know, just epicness. Which, yeah. So that's what I have to say about Mando Chapter 6. There is one more thing. It's kind of not filler because Mayfeld comes back. But at the same time, it's still pretty filler considering that they could have had someone other than Mayfeld be used to track down an Imperial. Unless he comes back in Season 3, which is always an option. Or maybe even some of the other characters come back. But moving on to Chapter 7, and really I'm just going to say Chapter 7 and 8 because honestly it gets a little bit difficult to tell between them because they flow right into each other and they flow right into each other, so may as well view them as one episode. So he basically gets this call from Grief Karga to where he's going to go in and he's going to trick the client, or the client, right? Yeah, the client. He's going to trick the client and basically free himself from the Empire's hunting of Baby Yoda or Grogu. And so he gathers in Cara Dune, he gets Queel and the Blurgs, he gets IG-11 with Queel. That's it, I think. And he goes in and meets up with Grief Karga and his two like, or was it three? Yeah, there was three. He meets up with those three guys and Grief Karga, and they head off. They get attacked by those winged things, which is a scene I didn't really like. It was kind of confusing. The only really thing that happened is you got to see Force healing. You got to see. I suppose it's very important because Grief Karga, that's where he had a change of heart to where he's going to change the plan to take on or to take out the client rather than just take out Mando, which would have been the easier path for him. But anyways, Grief Karga changes his mind, takes out those two bounty hunters, and they go in with a new plan where Mando is, well, the same plan Mando thought they had, but Grief Karga had a different plan in mind at first. So they go in and Mando tries to trick the client, but the client gets killed by Moff Gideon anyways. And then Moff Gideon is basically, yep, I'm the bad guy, not the client, and now you are going to hand over the the child. And he said this super well and like just such an awesome voice. And I gotta give credit to Giancarlo Esposito because that he is a great performer. It's like you have something I want, and you can just hear that. It's so menacing, and they play on that in chapter 15 when Mando's like, "You have something I want," but it's not the same with it's not as cool of a delivery because that line was designed for Moff Gideon and that actor Giancarlo Esposito. Well done on that acting. That was very good. But leave your thoughts about the conclusion in the chat or the comments as well. But anyways, it's super menacing, and then he sends his speeder bikes, and they kill Queel and pick up the baby, and the episode ends. So that left us on a pretty awesome cliffhanger. Awesome, as in the same way The Empire Strikes Back is awesome. It's kind of sad, kind of terrifying, but that's kind of what stories are for. So then you pick up right at chapter 8, and the speeder bikes are going, and they pause at this town, like right outside of town, and they have this super funny like scene where they're like talking to each other, and one of them is like super hardcore into the Empire, and the other one is kind of like, oh yeah, wow, he killed his own men. That's crazy. But I think it goes a little bit too far when they start shooting at the little I don't know what it is. They start shooting at something and they're just missing. And they're like shaking their blasters. I think they went a little bit too far there. But you know, it's fine. Not everything is going to be perfect, as close as that episode comes to being there. Because then is another great scene when IG-11 shows up and he takes out those like speeder bike guys. That was super cool. You get to see more of his personality. Then he flies in with with Grogu and take on that speeder bike, which again, speeder bikes so awesome. Then he gets in and basically they have this giant fight with all the Imperials, and Mando does that classic Mandalorian strategy, or classic Din Djarin strategy is what I should say, where he just runs forward, takes up the bigger gun, and just starts mowing down everyone. But then Moff Gideon, and this is a great scene. Moff Gideon pulls out his tiny little gun, points it at Mando. Mando turns around with his giant gun, and it's like, oh, this is funny. Good try, Moff Gideon. But then you see Moff Gideon change his aim, and it like focuses on the power pack, and you're like, oh no! And then he shoots it and it blows up, and it's awesome. And then they retreat. Then they send in the flame trooper, and in this awesome scene, Grogu deflects the fire. Then another awesome scene. IG-11 is able to take off Mando's helmet to save him from death. And then another awesome, well, not quite as awesome. This is another part of this episode that I think isn't quite as good as it could have been. Well, I suppose I don't have a alternative to what they could have done here, but part of the episode that makes it not perfect, basically. Which is, you know, it's a great episode when I'm like, oh, and this is another part of the episode that wasn't really perfect. But anyways, and like walking through the sewers, and they find the Mandalorian stuff. But then the armor comes out, and you get to see like, you're basically equipping Din Djarin for going on this grand adventure, not just for the end of this episode, but for season 2. And you come up with this plan to get back to the ship, and it's basically an awesome setup. They get to the lava boat thing. And they're like, oh, there's a platoon of stormtroopers out there. What do? And then one of the best scenes in the Mandalorian show, IG-11 goes out and blows himself up, turning that joke from chapter 1 into this super sad and epic victory, but you lose one of your heroes on the way thing. It's a great scene. I really liked it. But anyways, after that, of course, Moff Gideon comes down in his TIE fighter, and Mando has this awesome scene where he flies up with his jetpack, turns around midair and shoots his grapple line, and then hooks on, and then he basically takes out the TIE fighter from on it, which was so awesome. I loved that scene. And he barely lands with his jetpack. Super cool. Everything about I can't even say everything. I mean, chapter 8 was my favorite episode for, like, even season 2 was great, But through most of season 2, I was like, yeah, chapter 8 is still better. Which leads me to season 2. Chapter 9 was an awesome intro to to season 2. Um, it's not really super connected to the main plot. I mean, there is that it reiterates his mission of looking for Mandalorians. But other than that, it's kind of a side quest. So it starts with this awesome scene where he's like in this like underground. There's like graffiti everywhere, and he's like walking these dark streets. There's this foreshadowing of these like red-eyed cat things, which was comes into play later, and it's awesome. And then he goes in and sees the Gamoran guards fighting, which is such a cool idea. The entire atmosphere of that place is also pretty well done. Then he talks with this like mob boss with like he's like a cyclops, and then they turn on him, and you kind of see that Beskar is super expensive, super valuable. Lots of people are hunting it out, and it's putting Mandalorians in a tough spot. Um, and Mando takes them all out, and it's an awesome scene. Then he like beats up this other guy or the mob boss who ran away, and another awesome scene. And then it's just so cool. Then he shoots the light, and those little like red-eyed monsters that were foreshadowed earlier like start coming in, and you're like, oh, they're afraid of the light. That's so awesome. And he goes back to his ship and flies to Tatooine. And another thing is one thing I do want to mention about Chapter 9 is you get to see a lot about Tatooine and how Mando interacts with that. It kind of shows, or at least to me, it seems that he has spent a lot of time on Tatooine. And in his own words, he says, I've spent much time on Tatooine. Like, I don't think that's just chapter 5. I think that's, like, he spent an actual significant portion of his life on Tatooine, specifically with the Tusken Raiders, because he respects them so much. He knows their language. He recognizes their dogs. Which, by the way, super cool that they show the Tusken Raider dogs again. That was very cool to see. This entire episode was just a very cool. He gets Boba Fett's armor, which comes into play later. He meets Cobb Vanth, which is a book character that gets brought into live action. That's super cool to see. I don't think that's been done before. Or maybe, no, I think you see Snap or Temmin Wexley in Rise of Skywalker and Force Awakens, I think. And probably The Last Jedi, too, if you see him in both of those. I don't really know what he looks like because there's comics about him, but I read the book. And he's like the first book character that was like focused on in a movie that I know of. But anyways, that was cool to see Cobb Vanth. I do wish that they kept the name of Mos Pelgo as Freetown, and maybe said like all the other Tatooines called it Mos Pelgo, but Cobb Vanth and the other people of Freetown called it Freetown. But I guess I don't know. You can't have everything. So yeah, it was just a great episode. He killed the Krayt Dragon, which was awesome. It doesn't really make much sense that they didn't think of that before, but like when they're coming up with the plan, they didn't think of having it eat a bantha and then blow up the bantha. But I guess it was cool to see, and yeah. So that was an awesome episode. Chapter 9. Chapter 10 is less good. I didn't really like it. It doesn't. It's pretty filler. You don't really need it. You could have just gone straight to chapter 3, but it's still pretty cool Star Wars content. And a lot of people like Frog Lady. You get that awesome leitmotif of Baby Yoda. Super cool. Like when he's eating the little egg things, which is kind of disturbing, I guess. But yeah, it's a pretty weird episode. I do like that you see the New Republic, and his ship gets damaged, and he flies on to chapter. I said chapter 3 earlier. It's chapter 11. Anyways, chapter 11 was super awesome. I feel like it should have been a little bit longer with a bit more time in between Mando's first and second encounters with the Mandalorians to kind of show what he's thinking at that time and to kind of give more breathing room. But it was still a great episode. I loved seeing the Mandalorians, and the choreography there was super awesome. How Bo-Katan and her other two Mandalorians moved as a unit, and Mando kind of just was a little bit behind or a little bit ahead at pretty much the entire time. And then there are interactions where Mando is more honorable, but also kind of holding on to past traditions, like not taking off his helmet. Um, but anyways, that was a great episode. I love the translation of Bo-Katan to live action. Um, it was very well done. Maybe she was a bit young, but I guess that's a compliment, depending on how you look at it. Um, so yeah, it was a good episode. I like seeing it, and it's got excellent plot ramifications, move the plot in the direction that I really enjoy. Putting Mando closer to Mandalorian politics, if you can call Mandalorian politics politics. Um, anyways, just a great episode. And then chapter 4, again, another great episode. And you get to see a bit more about Dr. Parshing and their plans for Grogu. You get to see Moff Gideon, or not Moff Gideon, Grief Karga and Cara Dune again, which is super cool. You get to see where they're at. They have an awesome fight scene at the beginning for Cara Dune. They have awesome fight scenes throughout for all of them. You get to see, I forget his name and his species. It's the blue guy with fins. That guy, you get to see him again. Yeah, I just really liked that episode. Something about it. I don't know what it is. Oh, and also, Mando gets his ship repaired again, which is very good because it was in very bad condition after the last couple episodes. But then after that, or I should say after all of that, because that's quite a bit, Mando finally catches up to this Jedi that he's been tracking, which I suppose a Jedi that he's been looking for. And that's Ahsoka Tano, which very cool to see. Chapter 5 was a big episode for so many people. I'm less affected by all the nostalgia. I don't know what it is, but like a lot of people will see these episodes and they're like, "Oh, it's Ahsoka. This is the best episode ever," or "Oh, it's Luke, and because of that, this is the best episode ever." And I'm like, "Well, the writing was really good, and the implementation of these characters was really good, and these guys are in character. I like that, and it makes sense for them to be here. I like that." And Mando was super cool, and the action was super cool. I don't know. I feel like a lot of people are just looking at the characters and being like, "Oh, they were in this episode. This episode is good." Oh, they weren't in this episode. This episode is bad. Which I just disagree with that. I guess it's a subjective opinion, but it's the right opinion for me. Leave your thoughts about that. How much do you value characters returning or having cameos or all that kind of stuff? And it's okay if you like fan service. It's called fan service for a reason. It's because fans like it. So, and fan service done well is good. It's done in service of the fans, and the fans appreciate that. But, anyways, that's a little rant about fan service being bad, but it's not actually bad. I really liked it. Ahsoka in this episode was super awesome. I love the white lightsabers. The one thing I didn't like, and this is actually the reason this episode was not as better than Chapter 8, in my opinion, is the fight scene between Ahsoka and the Magistrate. Didn't really seem that good of choreography. I hate to say it, but there were a lot of shots that were really good where they were kind of pretty far apart, and then Ahsoka would dash in and knock the spear aside, and she'd have the spear pointed towards Ahsoka and kind of be fending her off. But then there's also times when they're like standing up straight, and that's not a good fighting stance, or they're like twirling around the spear, and it's like that's not a staff, that's a spear. You should use it like a spear. And it just, I don't know. The fight scene seemed a little bit awkward. In fact, to some extent, most of Ahsoka's fight scenes seemed a bit awkward. It wasn't very bad, but it's just a little bit awkward. But then that one was kind of like, oof, this is pretty awkward. So, anyways, that's my thoughts on Chapter 5. Super cool episode, and I like that they, I suppose, I'll get into this when I talk about Chapter 14. They go to Tython, which I think is super awesome. I would have preferred a larger temple that maybe they go inside of. And maybe he has to spend time, like, going through a bunch of rooms in the temple, kind of like he has to get through a bunch of ancient Jedi traps or something. That would be very interesting. and probably be a lot cooler than just having him look around for a lever or something, which he could still do on the inside, and it would add more time to the episode, which is something pretty much. I think the biggest complaint that people have about the Mandalorian episodes is that they're too short, which is just hilarious because it's not really a complaint. It's like a compliment because you're like, well, I wish there was more of it. I wish you, like, that's a compliment. So, I don't know. That's super cool that the biggest complaint that most people have is that it's too short. So, I think the temple was a bit small and a bit humble. Not exactly the kind of Jedi temple you would expect to be on Tython, but it's cool enough. And then, of course, Boba Fett returns, which I thought was super awesome. That he returned in the way he did, and the fight scenes with him were maybe a bit. He was a bit more skilled than I would have done personally, but at the same time, you kind of have to make him that powerful just because of the fan reaction. If he was as powerful as I would make him, because I would look at him in the Clone Wars and him in uh, Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and I would base his skill solely on that. However, many fans, a lot older fans than me, read a lot of Legends comics about him. They've played with the action figure. They basically saw him and imagined his abilities and shared that with the world and got like reinforcement that that is what he is, when really he isn't really that. But now he is, at least to some extent. He's not so powerful he's going to take on like Mace Windu or something. Like Mace Windu would destroy him. But I don't know. He is more powerful than I would have liked, but at the same time, I very much understand that. I've been in too many comment sections to not understand that, and I think they did a good job with it. And his fighting style, like his skill level, is fine. His fighting style is excellent. They nailed that. He is so brutal. He's so cunning. Just an amazing, amazing fights to see. It's so awesome to see, and it's very different from Mando. Very different from most Mandalorians, which makes him unique and makes him interesting. Yeah, so I just love that about him. And the knee rockets, that was so unique and so interesting. I loved that. Um, so leave your thoughts about Boba Fett and his choreography and his implementation into the Mandalorian, specifically in Chapter 6, in the chat. Leave it in the comments. All that kind of stuff. I'd love to discuss it with you, not just discuss it with a microphone. So moving on to, or actually, Chapter 6. I think the best part of Chapter 6 for the story, not for the characters and not for the setting, and not just for looking cool or anything or a cool scene. I think the best part for the story was when the Dark Troopers took Baby Yoda. That was so emotional and it set the story up to, it gave it a lot of options basically. They could, it just sets it up so that for a rescue basically, which I thought was super awesome. It was my prediction for that, because it was such an awesome idea and something that they would totally do. At least in my head, is something. It seems like something they would do. The story writers, that is, and they did it, which was very cool. I like that. Then at the very end, they blow up his ship, which took me by such surprise. Like they show a ship just boom get blown up, and just so surprising. But it makes sense, and I don't know what they're gonna do about that. So yeah, I'll talk about that later actually. After Chapter 8, because a lot of people were like, oh, he's gonna take Slave One or some other ship or something. But this actually hasn't yet been resolved, and I'll discuss more about my thoughts on that later. So moving on to Chapter 7, and a lot of people after the last episode were like, oh, he's gonna track down Mayfeld, figure out where Moff Gideon is, and go take him on in this episode, and then in the next episode we're gonna finish it, just like last season. But in this one is more like, oh, we're just gonna find out where Gideon is and send him a message. So just that tiny little chunk that most people would have thought was the like intro, like the first third of the episode. So he tracks down Mayfeld, brings him to this Imperial like refinery, mining or whatever. They're getting explosives basically. And then they uh, basically use the console to figure out where Moff Gideon is, and then they leave. Seems like a pretty dull episode on paper, but it's implement like Mayfeld's character in this and his acting, his dialogue, and even the action in this episode was great. It was all very great. It reminds me, not reminds me. It makes me think about um, well, I've actually already thought about this. It makes probably more the casual fan think about the benefits of having an empire and the pros and cons of it versus the rebellion, how the empire sees the rebellion as terrorists and all that kind of stuff. And um, Mayfeld brings up a lot of good points, and Mayfeld's officer, I forget his name, he brought up decent points. I would side more with Mayfeld. And we don't really get to hear Mando's thoughts that much, but you also get to hear Mayfeld's thoughts about Mando and his willingness to take off his helmet. He says, he has this line where he's like, everyone has lines they don't cross until things get hard, which is, I don't know, I think it's a interesting point of view. It's very pessimistic, but at the same time, it's true at least in Mando's case, and probably in most people's lives' case as well. Um, so I don't know. That was interesting, and as I said, the action was good. You got to see Mando and Mayfeld like run away. They break out of the wall, climb up, and of course, there's when Mando's fighting without his armor, which was super interesting to see, and I love how they handled that. That was awesome. You see him like trying to rely on his armor, but realizing, oh, this is just plastoid. I'm not a Mando anymore. Wait, I'm not wearing Beskar basically. And he doesn't have his flamethrowers. He doesn't have his. He doesn't have his. What is it called? His Ambin sniper rifle, which is something I forgot to mention in Chapter 6, is they blew up his rifle. Let's just have a moment of silence for that rifle. It's such a cool rifle. They should not have destroyed it. But anyways, they also have two other rifles used by Cara Dune and Fennec Shand, which was cool to see. Cara Dune is sniping. That's interesting. But also Fennec Shand, obviously. A sniper should be sniping. Then you see Boba Fett come in with Slave 1. And then you see Mayfeld, an Imperial sharpshooter, shoot like this tiny little thing and blow up a whole bunch of stuff. Which was another awesome thing to see because, as I said, he's an Imperial sharpshooter. It makes sense. It's a skill he should totally have. So, yeah, it was a excellent episode, in my opinion, despite its filleriness, which isn't really filler. It wasn't really filler, but it was kind of, how do you describe it? It's like it took more time than it should have, or more time than you would expect, but it was still good. It wasn't very concise storytelling, which is great because it's a TV show. So many people are like, oh, it should be longer. But of course that leads to filler episodes, which is fine because the show is great at doing filler. Then you move on to chapter 16, which was finally at the very end of season 2. They dethroned chapter 8, in my opinion. With chapter 16 was such a good episode. I don't know, it's very well done. It had an amazing conclusion to so much stuff. Let me just start at the beginning. So, at the very beginning, they have the scene where Slave One is shooting at this Lambda class shuttle. Super awesome. Then they go in, they board, and this Imperial is taunting Cara Dune about Alderaan, which I loved. That was a great opener. Then they meet up with Bo-Katan, and they have this fight between the other Mandalorian and Boba, which was awesome. And a lot of people think Boba lost, but no one lost that. It was a tie. So Boba knocks her down, grapples at her, which then she outmuscles him, which I don't agree with that. She's a lot smaller than he is. He should be able to outmuscle her. And that was with the grapple line. He grapples her and she kind of pulls on him. But after that, she uses her jetpack to basically like slam him into the ground, which was awesome. But he didn't lose, as I mentioned earlier. He had already slammed her into the ground, so now it's basically tied. Then they both shoot their flamethrowers. It's a tie. Somehow shooting two flamethrowers at each other kind of cancel out. I don't know how true that is. I'd love to see a test on that. But obviously, I don't have two flamethrowers, so oh well. And then Bo-Katan ends the fight. So and the other thing is, Boba should not be able to beat everyone. I mean, a lot of people say, "Oh, he's the best. Oh, you can't take on Boba. He's the best." But I disagree. I don't like he gets taken out by a blind guy, kind of. I mean, forgive me, but it's something that happens and a feat that should be taken into account when measuring his abilities. Even if it was a fluke, no one as skilled as no one's skilled enough to take on every Mandalorian, or pretty much all Mandalorians, I should say, should be able to suffer that kind of fluke. I don't know. Boba, I don't know. It's difficult to describe because I feel like so many people overrate him, but at the same time, he does deserve a lot of credit. I just feel like he doesn't deserve as much credit as he deserves. So it's hard to describe my feelings about his skill level because like he is one of the best bounty hunters ever. In fact, I would say he's the best bounty hunter, but not the best warrior. Um, but at the same time, so many because he's so overrated, at least in my opinion, um, like I kind of have to undervalue him and bring up all his shortcomings to kind of compensate for that. But then it kind of sounds like I'm making him seem like this pathetic fool, and he's not. He's super skilled. So there's this balance that I have to meet, and I can't quite figure out how to hit that balance of kind of explaining that he's not as powerful as most people think he is, but he still is very powerful. But anyways, I thought that fight between him and Costco Reeves, I think that's the name of the Mandalorian, was super awesome. Then after that, another awesomeness. They planned the thing, which one thing that I didn't like about this episode, and it may be the only one of two things that I can think of right now about this episode I didn't like, and that is Dr. Parshing seemed a bit too eager to give away information. And there's not really a good explanation for that. It's just, oh, Dr. Parshing is giving away information, I guess. So, I mean, if they asked him, then yeah, then he should give away information. He doesn't seem the type to resist interrogation very hard. But at the same time, he shouldn't be just giving it away without even being asked. So then, after they plan their attack, they do the attack, and it goes very well. They make it to the bridge, and Mando makes it to the Dark Troopers. Except that Mando is just a little bit too late, and one of the Dark Troopers gets out. So he fights that, and this is great because you get to see its powers. You get to see how difficult to destroy they are, and that blasters don't work on them. More on that later. So yeah, blasters just bounce right off of them. Flamethrowers just go right through them. Obviously, grapple lines, you don't want to do that. You get to see them. Oh, one thing I loved is the Dark Trooper's like punching his face in, and instead of his his mask bending, the wall behind him is like bending in, and it bends in like 8 inches. It's awesome. Maybe not 8 inches, at least 6 inches. But then of course he gets the Beskar spear, stabs it through the neck, and you defeat it. And like, oh, okay, so it can be defeated. You kind of get to see blaster fire doesn't do much, but a Beskar spear that can take it out if you hit it in the neck. I don't think it would take it out if you hit it in the armor. And then after that, he throws them out of the airlock, which is a great way to defeat them because that means they can come back later because, of course, they can fly. So then he goes, or then they make it to the bridge. I think that's the proper timeline. And Bo-Katan, they take out everyone and they're like, where's Moff Gideon? And then at that point, Mando goes into the room with Grogu in it and he sees Moff Gideon. So excellent timing there. Well done. Good story writing. And Moff Gideon is holding the Darksaber over Grogu. Instantly I froze, got super tense, super focused. What's gonna happen? This is Grogu we're talking about here. Don't let anything happen to him, kind of. So then Moff Gideon kind of convinces Grogu, and he actually convinced me at least a little bit. I still didn't trust him completely, which I'm sure didn't trust him completely either. But Din walks up, takes the child, and gets attacked by Moff Gideon. Um, he hits him in the Beskar jetpack, which doesn't make much sense because like you're not going to be able to cut through that. And then of course, Din defeats him, which super awesome. That fight was very good. I have the criticism that Din didn't use his spear like a spear, which I had that criticism in chapter 5 as well. But I think he used it more effectively than the magistrate. Um, and there's also the explanation that he hasn't been trained in the spear, whereas the magistrate, that's her signature weapon. How would you not be trained to use that in the way that it's designed to be used? So, anyways, I did like that fight, and I especially like the outcome of that fight, which is now Din gets the Darksaber, which I think was Moff Gideon's goal. I mean, he doesn't really need the Darksaber. He doesn't really have much risk of getting killed, at least he probably doesn't think he does. And this is just going to sow a seed of fighting between Bo-Katan and Mando, which is kind of going to stall for time. And I don't know. He kind of gets to like rub this in Bo-Katan's face, and he knows so much about her, about the Darksaber. He's gonna want to do that and know how to do that, and this is the best way to do that. And he's got the Dark Troopers coming anyways. It's not like he's in big danger of losing this. He's got this in the bag, basically. Like there's no way he can lose, which is proven true when Din has this conflict with Bo-Katan where she's like, "You defeated him. You got the Darksaber, and you didn't save him from me." And then there's this conflict, and then the Dark Troopers come in, and they're like, "Well, we're all screwed." And they close the blast doors. And then there's this X-Wing, which this is the part, this is everyone's favorite part. It's the part that's going to be talked about for the longest, and it's the part that took this from, this is a great episode, perhaps better than Chapter 8 too. This is better than Chapter 8. The execution of this was very well done. They didn't say, "Oh, it's Luke Skywalker." They didn't say, "Oh, this is Red 5 standing by," or something cheesy like that. They had the X-Wing come in, and you're like, who could that be? Is that like that one guy who like is going around with Trapper Wolf everywhere, which is Dave Filoni's character? But he's not going to be much help. Why is there only one of him? Is there more than one? And then I saw Grogu like looking at the screen with the X-Wing, and I was like, that's Luke Skywalker. And that was such an awesome reveal. And then of course they show him walk through the halls, and you're like, that's a Jedi. That's definitely Luke Skywalker. And then you see the green lightsaber, and that is, and you just see more and more clues that this is Luke Skywalker. And I saw his hilt at one point, so I'm like, okay, it's Luke Skywalker. So the final reveal wasn't super surprising for me, but yeah, it was a cool reveal nonetheless. I loved it. I loved his fighting style. It was a smoother version of his fighting style from episode 6, which obviously makes a lot of sense. It's been 5 years. He's been refining his skills. He used the Force a lot more. He used it a lot more smoothly. He used it more powerfully, which again makes sense. It's been 5 years. He's been refining his skills, and then he's very calm. He's very, he like shows up. He's like, "Well, here I am, Grogu. It's time to go," and it's such a good ending to that chapter of their life, of Din's life. And perhaps Grogu will come back later. Perhaps Grogu will have his own show, or Luke will have his own show. They could do a lot of things from here with that. But for now, at least, Din is going to be focusing on something other than Grogu, which I think is, I don't know if I like it or not. I think it depends on their execution. But regardless of what happens in the future, this was a great thing to see in the moment. And I'm hopeful for the future of Din and Bo-Katan, and some people also include Boba in this. There could be some other ones too, about people contesting for the Mandalorian throne, which is very interesting. You'd get to see like Mandalorian Civil Wars, which I would love to see. There's not very many of them, so they're gonna have to unite, so there can't be too much fighting. Um, but perhaps that's why you don't see them very much in the sequels. Another reason that could be is because they just don't care that much. I mean, maybe there's a few Mandalorian fighters amongst the rebellion or the resistance. I'm sorry, or the fleet of people who come at the end of the Rise of Skywalker. I mean, there's so many of them. There's got to be some Mandalorians, I would think. Um, but if they're all rebuilding from a civil war and the Great Purge, and the Clone Wars, that could explain why there's not very many of them. Even though I don't think it needs much explanation, but some people do. Um, and when I say some people do, it's kind of a generalization. I think some people do. I'm not super certain. Um, but I'm pretty sure there's people like that. But anyways, this was such a good episode, chapter 8 that or chapter 16 that is. Chapter 8 was also good, by the way. Um, and it had such a good setup for season 3 and such a um, emotional and satisfying ending with Grogu going off with Luke and Din taking off his helmet, and you get to see like a Jedi in action against Dark Troopers. Um, wow, what an episode! That's pretty much all I can say. Is wow, what an episode! So well done. But I think that's about it for my review of all 16 chapters of The Mandalorian. I suppose, like, as a whole, I would say, like, just describing the thing as a whole, I would say this is a very, very good show. Um, like, when Disney bought Star Wars, I was still pretty young, but I was like, oh, well, this is gonna be cool. We're gonna see new movies. And episode 7 comes out, and that's pretty similar to episode 4. And then episode 8 comes out, or I should say Rogue One comes out, and I liked it. And episode 8 comes out, and it was fine. And then Solo comes out, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Not super interesting, but it was pretty cool. And then 9 comes out, and I'm like, and then Mando comes out. Actually, Mando came before 9. What am I talking about? So Mando comes out, and it's like, oh, this is a great show. And season 2 comes out, and oh, this is a great show. And they got it so consistently good pretty much every time. Chapter 10 and chapter 4, two places where I think they missed the mark. But they didn't, like, it's not a bad episode. It's just not as good as the rest. And it's so in the prequels, there's a lot of awesome moments in the prequels, at least in my opinion. But there's also a lot of bad moments. Mando doesn't really have that. It's got good moments and not as good moments. Mostly anyway. I think the good moments aren't as good as in the prequels. Like the "You Were My Brother" Anakin, that is so powerful. Like that whole scene is awesome. And even the fighting there is good. There's a few parts that are just horrendous, but most of the fighting is just spectacular, well done, super fast, super engaging, like that makes sense. You see their styles clearly. But then there's some parts where it's just awful, and the Mandalorian is just kind of like it's all cool, not quite as cool as the prequels, but then again, it's all cool. There's no like randomly bad parts. So it's a consistently good show, is how I would describe the Mandalorian, and it also has a lot of surprises, which is something I think is very important. You can't just give the audience everything that they're expecting. If you do that, sure, it's going to be a good show, but it's never going to be a great show. Which is something that a lot of people say about The Last Jedi. Oh, you need to subvert expectations, which is true. Subverting expectations without, okay. What I'm trying to say is Baby Yoda, or I should say Grogu. Then you have, what are some other big reveals? You have IG-11 coming back. Then you have IG-11 dying. They're not things people expect. You see Din taking off his helmet. You see Luke showing up. You see Ahsoka. I mean, Ahsoka was kind of leaked, but it's so cool. And I mean, if you didn't read the leaks or get exposed to the leaks, is a better way to put it. Then yeah, it's a reveal. There's so many surprises. The reveal that Cobb Vanth is going to be in it. The reveal of Boba Fett. All these things. They're things that you don't expect, and they take it from this show that just looks good and makes sense to a show that is compelling and interesting and engaging. So this is a great show. I love it. I can't wait for season 3. Um, I don't know. I don't know what else to say. It's super awesome. So with that said, if you like it too, like the video. Um, Leave your thoughts in the chat or in the comments. And have a, yeah, just check out my other videos, all that kind of stuff. But